Republican. He has been active in the party since he became eligible to vote. Drew was a delegate to his BPOU Congressional District and State Convention in 2012. Currently, Drew is the treasurer of the College Republican State Board and senior vice chair of the U of M College Republicans. Drew is currently seeking a BA in political science and will graduate next spring. To the audience left of Drew is Quentin Watham-Kama, and he has been active in the Democratic Party during the 2008 election cycle. Since then, Quentin has worked as a field organizer for the Minnesota DFL. He has been a delegate to the 2012 Democratic National Convention. Quentin has been a member of the Minnesota Young DFL's Executive Committee since 2010. He currently serves as a national committeeman. Quentin is currently seeking a BA in Urban Studies, and he expects to graduate next spring. Brandon Matson, at the far end of the stage, has been a member of the Socialist Alternative for more than 9 years. Brandon first got politically active in high school, protesting the war in Iraq and supporting Ralph Nader's 2004 campaign for president. He currently serves on the Socialist Alternative's National Committee and is a recruitment coordinator for the Twin Cities, alongside his role as lead organizer of one of the 2 local branches. Brandon is a first-year graduate student at the University of Minnesota in the Department of Speech, Language, and Hearing Sciences, where he's pursuing a doctorate in audiology. Mike Lenzegrave came out as a libertarian after listening to Ron Paul's views during the last election. He has been a member of the Young Americans for Liberty since the beginning of the last semester. Mike is a senior at the University of Minnesota. He's pursuing a Bachelor of Individualized Studies with a major in psychology, public health, and political science. He's also pursuing a Spanish minor. He is also looking forward to furthering the cause of liberty after he graduates. Our format for this evening is as follows. We'll begin with the panelists making a series of short statements about governments and markets. Then they will answer 6 questions, 3 about domestic policy and 3 about foreign policy. Next, they will answer 3 questions submitted by the audience. All the panelists agree to the following rules. Panelists' responses will be limited to 2 minutes and 2 minutes only, and the order of speaking will be determined randomly, so no one has disadvantages of always speaking first. After they have given their statements and answered their 9 questions each, we will open the floor to discussion. We ask the audience to please hold your comments and thoughts and questions until the very end of the debate. We will devote at least a half an hour to question and answer. So, without further ado then, we'll ask for our first statement, and we'll begin with our Republican representative, Drew. What is the ideal role of government?
Thank you, and I'd like to thank Austin and Young Americans for Liberty and all the other groups for putting on this debate, and Kaufman for hosting it. The ideal role of government is pretty simply outlined in the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution articulates the role of the government, it articulates the limits on said government, and it's frankly the model for what the United States federal government should look like. The government in the United States was intended to be small, it was intended to be efficient, and it was intended to do a very small amount of things very effectively. I think since our founding, we've expanded the role of government ridiculously, and government encompasses so many areas, such a large sector of our economy, and I think that's detrimental to us and our future as a country.
Our next speaker will be Mike Lensgrave, representing the Young Libertarians.
Hello everyone, I'm Mike Lensgrave. Young Americans for Liberty is a group comprised primarily of libertarians. The core principle of libertarian philosophy is the belief in the freedom from coercion and the rejection of the use of force whenever possible. Everyone has the inalienable right to life, liberty, and property as long as they do not infringe upon the rights of the others. Our rights are not granted to us by our government, they are ours by nature, which means our government cannot legally take them from us. The best form of government is small, limited, and unobtrusive, and guarantees maximum freedom for each individual. We believe that the more you try to control people, the more unintended consequences result. Freedom is what has made our country so great and is what has allowed us to live in abundance. Social and economic freedoms are one and the same, and they rise and fall together. We advocate free markets based on contracts between mutually agreeing parties, free from coercive government intervention, which only distorts these markets and makes them more inefficient. But sadly, today, our freedoms are in jeopardy. The modern political discourse has shifted too far to what our government will allow us to do, what types of guns we can own, who can and cannot get married, what substances we can put in our own bodies. I believe we need to shift the focus back to what we, the people, will allow the government to do. How much of our hard-earned money will we allow them to take from us? Should the government be allowed to conduct warrantless espionage on its own citizens like it can with the Patriot Act? Should the government be allowed to indefinitely detain U.S. citizens without trial like is authorized in the National Defense Authorization Act? These are the questions we need to be discussing today, and we at Young Americans for Liberty shed light on these issues because the mainstream media ignores them. Liberty is our society's most precious possession, and we need to ensure that we preserve it above all else.
Next speaker is Brandon Madsen from the Socialist Alternative.
Thanks. I'd like to try and answer this question by means of contrast, just because I think there's some misunderstandings out in the world about what socialism really stands for. And one of the things that distinguishes our group from all the other groups represented here is that all the other groups support the system of capitalism. We don't. So what does that mean? Capitalism is a system where the ultra-rich, in the post-Occupy terminology, the 1%, dominates society, including the democratic process. The electoral system is rigged at every level in favor of the rich. Gigantic corporations own most of the media. Elections are flooded with corporate cash, and you need to raise immense amounts of money just to be competitive. And as a result, a majority of US senators are millionaires, and they govern in the interests of other millionaires. There is tremendous inequality of wealth in this society. There is poverty, there is environmental catastrophe, and there are recurrent economic crises. All this in the richest country in the history of the world. And so I would ask the other groups over the course of the debate tonight how they can defend a system where this is the case. I think we need a different vision for society. The socialist vision of society is something fundamentally different. We're talking about real democratic control of society, not where the Fortune 500 companies own 80% of the economy and run it in their own private interests for their own private profit, but where on a community level, on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month sort of basis, in every school, neighborhood, and workplace, you have grassroots democracy and control of the economy in the interests of regular people. If we did this, we could meet the needs of all society. There's enough wealth to go around to do that right now. We just have to make it happen.
Now we'll hear from Quentin Watham-Kama from the Democratic Party.
Well, I guess when I look at this question, I think that government has four major roles, excluding national defense. I think the number one goal of government is to play a key role in preventing and mitigating market failure. The free market system, I think it's the best system, but to a point where the free market system should not put our economy into peril. I think that the best way to preventing and mitigating market failure is through sensible and reasonable regulations. In times of crisis, I believe that the government must intervene into the free market system to avoid economic catastrophe. I also believe that government has a responsibility to guarantee that goods and services are safe for consumption by the general public. I love my meat. I love having meat inspectors go through my meat. I love clean air. I love clean water. I think that is a responsibility of government to regulate and to examine. I think government needs to also push employers to treat their employees fairly. I think government needs to make sure that they are treating the general public fairly, and I also believe that government needs to have it also ensure that there is a social safety net. I think that when folks go through hard times, it is a responsibility of government to make sure that they can live a life of decency. I'm not saying that we should have a welfare state where folks are constantly getting financial help and bailouts and whatnot, but I think it's a responsibility of the government to make sure that people who are struggling can get through their tough times. And I think social programs are a great way to promote social mobility. and as an important role, they play an important role in tackling the issue of poverty.
Is following. In what direction is government heading? If current trends continue, what will government look like 10, 20, or even 50 years from now? And we'll reverse the order of the presenters and let Mr. Wakama speak first for the Democratic Party.
Well, after the 2012 elections, I think there was an important shift in how our political debates are beginning to be framed. I think for the first time in a long time, our debates aren't around cutting and reducing spending, but more on how can we raise revenues to fund the critical programs that we need. With that being said, I honestly have no clue what government will look like in the near future. If you would have asked my mom 10 years ago if we would have had an African-American president, she probably would have laughed in my face. I just can't, I don't feel comfortable making those type of predictions. I would hope that government would shift its focus on the elderly in the near future. Our population is going through a rapid demographic change. Things like Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare are going to be something that we really need to tackle. We're going to have to really deal with in the next 10, 15 years. I would also expect that there would be increased investment in things like critical infrastructure. A lot of our roadways and bridges and highways are deteriorating. They were built in the 1950s, so I think you would see massive investment in that. I don't see any big sort of welfare reform happening in the near future. There might be slight adjustments. And I also think that what we will see is that government is going to begin to use new technologies to become more efficient and slightly leaner.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Brandon Mattson from the Socialist Alternative.
I think to understand where government's heading right now, it's helpful to look at the recent past, because I think the trends that we've been seeing in the past few years are likely to continue if nothing fundamentally changes. I think the gap between rich and poor is going to keep getting bigger as it has over the past few years. I think we're going to continue to see a wave of privatization of social services, turning them into for-profit institutions. Chronic structural unemployment is going to weigh heavier and heavier on society. The environmental crisis is going to continue to deepen as the energy giants refuse to implement wide-scale renewable energy until every last drop of oil is burned or until it's too late to save the planet. I think this is where the current system has gotten us to, and that's where it's going to continue to go if we allow it to stay in place. I think there's no way out of this fate on the basis of a for-profit system, the system of capitalism. And luckily, though, I think there are signs of a worldwide fight back beginning. 2011 is going to go down in history, I think, as a new dawning of an age of revolt, where you saw Tunisia, Egypt, Wisconsin, and then the Occupy Wall Street movement arise. And I think that gives me hope that it's possible for things to change. But it's not going to be automatic. It's not going to change unless people like us actually make it change. These types of debates and these types of questions we're discussing, I don't think are a sort of academic point-scoring exercise, but they're of vital importance to the lives of millions of regular people around the world. And so if you agree with what you hear tonight from me, I would encourage you to check out the table for Socialist Alternative that we have outside and get involved and join.
Turn now to Mike Lensgrave, Young Americans for Liberty.
The direction I see our government heading is it's going to continue to stray from its limited role as defined in the Constitution. This is apparent because both the past two presidents, the current president and the previous one, have both enacted big government policies. And really, when you get down to it, Obama is really the same as Bush in many ways. He campaigned on promise of anti-war, yet he's expanded the war in the Middle East to several countries. He promised to repeal the Patriot Act, and he ended up extending it. He promised to close Guantanamo Bay. That's still open. He promised to get Wall Street out of the White House, and yet his cabinet and his czars are made up of several representatives from big corporations. And what I'm seeing is the Democrats are very similar to Republicans today, and it seems like this whole two-party system isn't really working. Brandon did make a good question, how can we defend capitalism? But I would argue that we don't have capitalism today. What we have is the collusion of state and corporations, which is known as corporatism, or as Benito Mussolini defined as fascism. So that is how I would defend the capitalist system, is because we do not have capitalism today. In years to come, I see massive financial problems for the United States. We have about $17 trillion of debt, not including unfunded liabilities. And the underlying conditions that caused the 2008 financial crisis are still present, like low interest rates, and now the Federal Reserve has taken up a policy of quantitative easing, which is just a big fancy word for printing money. So as long as these conditions are still present, I don't see our economy improving. I believe the gap between the rich and poor will continue to increase, but that is a direct result of this inflationary monetary policy.
That's the end.
And I see more limitation of freedoms in years to come.
Finally, Drew Christensen for the Republicans.
Our government is too big and it spends too much. As far as what government will look like in 10, 20, 50 years down the road, I think it'll probably look a lot like Brandon talked about his ideal government and how I think we're heading that way. And when Quentin and Brandon talked about their ideal government, I think that's the road we're headed down. So if that sounds good, I'd encourage us to stay in that direction. As far as when we talked about how we can't make a prediction as to the future, I think that's one of the problems is the Democrats in power don't care about the future, and they're spending so much money. They're spending our money, our children's money, our grandchildren's money, and that's exactly the problem. They don't think about the future. They don't want to think about the future. They just want to think about right now and what's going to get them votes right now, as opposed to thinking about the future of our kids and our grandkids. We need to drastically cut spending in this country. We spend so much more money than we take in, and it's arguable if we could even possibly take in as much money as we currently spend. It's probably not even possible to take in that much money without completely destroying our economy, and then it wouldn't even be sustainable. We borrow most of our money from China and from overseas, and we have a crippling national debt that we are putting on the backs of our children and our grandchildren. I think this needs to change, and I'd invite you to check out our table called Republicans out back if you agree.
We'll move on to the third topic question. Should government have a role in bank regulation? If yes, how so? And our first speaker will be Brandon Madsen from the Socialist Alternative.
Well, I definitely think that the banks are out of control right now, and we need to get a handle on that. That said, I don't trust the current government to regulate the banks because they've been doing a pretty bad job of it so far. And frankly, I don't think that regulation is enough. I think that if you look at the history between the Great Depression and today, it's been a history of the banks using their massive economic wealth and power to get around any regulations that are put on them, or to repeal those regulations by their control of the political system through big money. So I think we need to do something more fundamental. I think we need to take the banks into public democratic control and wield those resources in the interests of everyday people, students, youth, working people. I think if you did that, you could end the foreclosure crisis overnight and guarantee a place to live for every single family. You could extend credit to small businesses at fair, affordable rates. The wealth of Wall Street, instead of being gambled away by investors, could be directed into creating living wage jobs, developing and implementing green technology to save the environment, creating a free, high-quality education system at all levels, preschool through college, that could be accessible and available to all. This would be of massive benefit to basically everybody except the corrupt banking elite that crashed the economy in the first place and proved that they have no business running this system. I think we can do better than that.
I'll turn to Quentin Wathan-Okama from the Democratic Party.
Well, as I stated previously, I believe that government has a key responsibility of government is to mitigate and prevent market failure. And I think, once again, this can be done through reasonable and sensible regulations. In this country, for the last 20 years, there's been a trend towards deregulation. and it's proven to have disastrous effects. When you look back at the financial crisis, you saw that regulators let the reckless subprime lending go unchecked. They let the derivatives market go unregulated, and they only acted when it was already far too late. I think this can't happen again. We need to strengthen the laws that we already have passed, like Dodd-Frank and the Housing Economic Recovery Act. I also think we need to reinstate Glass-Steagall. We need to make sure that banks don't recklessly gamble with depositors' money. And I would even go further. I support Senator Sanders' proposed bill that would dismantle banks that Treasury classifies as too big to fail. And I also believe that the Justice Department needs to investigate if there was criminal negligence in the financial crisis. And I think they need to use laws like the Sarbanes-Oxley Act to put CEOs and CFOs in jail if they lie to regulators.
Drew Christensen from the Republican Party.
The government has too much of a role in the financial system. There's too many regulations. And I would assume that Quentin and the Democrats would believe that we're good to go right now as far as regulations. We had a Democratic president, Barack Obama, for 2 years with a Democratic House and a filibuster-approved majority in the Senate, so they could pass whatever they want. So I assume they have all the regulations that they currently want. So he said he wanted more, but I don't understand why there wasn't. Apparently there must not have been support even within the Democratic Party for those regulations because they controlled the government for 2 years. As far as what I think we should do, we need to deregulate the financial system. The government interference, when we have a recession like we did a few years ago, the government comes in and tries to pull us out of the recession, tries to stabilize the economy, which feels good and it seems good, it makes us feel better, but that just sets us up for another collapse. It creates, we hear a lot of talk about false bubbles. That creates a false bubble in our economy that pops and sends us back into another recession, which then causes the government to try and pull us out of that recession, spending more money that we don't have and putting that on the backs of our children and our grandchildren. What we need to do is let the economy, deregulate the economy and let it stabilize itself so that we can have stable growth and less dramatic rises and falls in the market.
Mike Lensgrave, Young Americans for Liberty.
I would say the government has no business regulating the financial industry. Government regulation is what caused the problem in the first place. The government created the Federal Reserve in 1913 and gave them a complete monopoly on our currency, which ironically is the only monopoly that's ever existed in American history, and it's thanks to the government. The Federal Reserve caused the economic crisis by manipulating interest rates. In 2001, then Chairman Alan Greenspan lowered interest rates from 6.5% to 1% in 2003. Now what this does is it distorts the price system. Interest rates are a means of communicating valuable information in the market to individual actors who then act upon this information. And when you distort this information, it sends false info to these actors and they make bad decisions. It's called a moral hazard. In addition, the government guaranteed the loans that the banks made, which has also created a massive moral hazard. So this is explained well in the Austrian business cycle theory from the Austrian School of Economics. Obama did not solve the crisis. He just merely prolonged the suffering. When the stock market crashed in 2008, that was essentially the market clearing the malinvestment. And what he did was prevent that from occurring. And now we are keeping interest rates low. They're between 0 to 2.5%. And now we're doing what I mentioned before is called quantitative easing, which is essentially monetizing the debt. The Federal Reserve is printing money at $85 billion a month. And what they're doing with that is spending $40 billion a month buying mortgage-backed securities from these banks to essentially try and reinflate the housing bubble. So we're doing the exact same things that caused the problem. The other $45 billion, they buy U.S. Treasury bonds, which is government debt. So that's where the monetizing the debt comes in. Oh, sorry. Government regulation is what caused the financial crisis.
And we'll now move on to domestic policy. The first question is, there is an estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. What is the best immigration policy? And our first speaker will be Drew Christensen from the Republican Party.
Well, there are many estimates as to how many illegal immigrants in the country. 11 million is about in the middle of those estimates. No matter what, we have millions and millions of illegal immigrants in this country. And it's kind of ridiculous. There's been many within my own party that have taken a very unrealistic approach to solving the problem of illegal immigration, with ridiculous statements like, we need to deport everyone, and those sorts of things. It's not a Republican idea to try and deport everyone. For one, it's not fiscally conservative. How are you going to send 11 million people back to their country of origin? That's simply, it's probably not possible, and if it was possible, it'd be prohibitively expensive. These people are not horrible people. They're not bad people, many of them. They are lawbreakers. They have broken a law by illegally entering this country. So I don't think we should give everyone citizenship like that. But I do think there needs to be a way to have legalized status in this country, an eventual path to citizenship, whether that means, I think everyone who's been waiting in line to legally immigrate from these countries ought to be a citizen before any illegal immigrant's a citizen. But we need to legalize having these people in our country so that they can pay taxes, so that they can help support our government. They're in some cases take gleaning services from our government. They should help support that government. And we need to have a path to legalization of these people and bring them out of the shadows and bring them into our society.
Mike Lensgrave, Young Americans for Liberty.
America was built by immigrants and has always been the land of the free. So people need to be able to come here freely to try and better themselves. Because borders are arbitrary, the inalienable rights we enjoy as Americans also apply to non-Americans as well. Our government should strive to make it as easy as possible for people to come here and create a better life for themselves. The undocumented immigrants benefit our nation in several ways. They do not receive tax benefits, but they still pay their share of taxes in the income that they earn. In addition, immigrants help to fund Social Security because they pay into it, but they don't receive any benefits from it. Advocates of deportation often claim that immigrants take jobs from hard-working Americans because they're willing to work for less wages. But this is an argument for economic protectionism, which does not benefit our nation. Labor is a scarce commodity that must also be subject to market forces. When labor costs are low, the more businesses can form, and that creates more jobs for everyone, and immigrants lower the cost of labor because it's cheaper for businesses to hire people so they can afford to hire more workers. In addition, Americans are customers of low-skilled immigrants. They purchase cheap services from them, such as house cleaning, landscaping, childcare, and construction, just to name a few. So we need to make it easier for these people to become citizens, like Drew said, and we need to stop prosecuting them to the full extent of the law just for coming across an arbitrary border when they really didn't break any real laws, in my opinion.
Brandon Matson from the Socialist Alternative.
Well, I definitely think it's hard to disagree with the idea that we absolutely should grant a path to citizenship for all undocumented immigrants in this country, and I would go as far as to say we should grant complete equality for everyone who lives and works here, regardless of current immigration status, that there should be a full, immediate, unconditional granting of citizenship rights for all who want them. That said, I think the reality is that the parties that have governed U.S. society over the past years and decades have, in practice, carried out a policy of repression of immigrants and deportations and so forth. Obama has deported record numbers of immigrants in his time as president. So I don't think that the views being expressed here represent what's actually taking place at a federal policy level. I think the reality is that although there's some rhetoric out in the national dialogue about deporting immigrants and so forth, the reality is that big business wants this immigrant workforce to remain as a compliant, fearful, permanent underclass that will accept low pay, the worst jobs, and won't fight back because they're afraid of repression. And I think we need to put an end to that. We need to end discrimination in housing, in pay, in access to public services. There should be no racial profiling. And as was already mentioned, immigrants are not only a crucial part of the economy who do contribute more than they receive back in benefits, but they're also our friends and our classmates and our neighbors and our coworkers, the people that make up our communities. And our interests are fundamentally the same, and we should stand together and support each other, fight for each other's rights.
Quentin Wakama from the Democratic Party.
Well, I think I'm the son of an immigrant. So I have a lot of respect for people who come to this country in search of a better life and opportunity. People made a dangerous journey to come here, and I think that's something that we really should relate to. Undocumented immigrants have become both the backbone in the agricultural and hospitality industries, and they have become key components of our economy. With that being said, I think it's really important to grant legal status because not only does it give certain rights to duties and obligations to these immigrants, but it will also give them certain protections from abuse and mistreatment from, like as Brandon said, big business. I support many provisions of the proposed Economic Opportunity and Immigration Act, Modernization Act, that's recently proposed by Senator Schumer. This act would grant current undocumented immigrants legal status with opportunity to later become U.S. citizens, a path to citizenship. This act would also do other things like creating a agricultural and a guest worker program, and it would double the number of H-1B visas, which is something that our visa system is just completely messed up. We really need to work on it. But I want to say this, I really think that immigration is a responsibility of the federal government. State government should not pass their own immigration laws. We're going to have a radical patchwork of laws where you go from one state to one state. It's ridiculous. I'm very, very, very key on this issue. Immigration is a duty of the federal government.
The policy question is as follows. What is the best approach to deficit reduction? And we'll start with Quentin Wakama from the Democratic Party.
All right, well, I think that we should take the Simpson-Bowles report and do a lot what it said. I think we need to increase revenues, and we need to do smart and responsible spending cuts. I'm also going to say something that's really unpopular. I think we need to end the Bush tax cuts, not just for the rich, but for everybody. When you look at, according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, the Bush-era tax cuts are the single largest contributor to the deficit for the foreseeable future. It's, like I said, it's unpopular, but I think it's going to better our nation in the long run.
Brandon Madsen from the Socialist Alternative.
Well, I think the whole framing of the debate in terms of deficit reduction is really has been an excuse to push forward a lot of the policies, neoliberal type policies, that have been favored by the rich for years anyway. It's just now there's a political and economic climate to justify it. I don't think we should buy into that. I don't think we should balance the budget on the backs of workers and young people, as is the substance of most of the proposals at the national level, even if they might have some token pieces of them that involve making the rich pay a little more. I don't think that regular people should have to suffer the consequences of this economic crisis when they did nothing to cause it. I think we should slash the military budget. There's over $700 billion a year spent on the Department of Defense. I think that would be a good place to start. End corporate welfare. Stop giving handouts to big corporations that already have more than enough money. That includes, I think we should establish single-payer healthcare, which would actually save money rather than spend more, because we could stop the massive handouts to the for-profit insurance companies that happen right now and that have intensified under the Obamacare plan. I think we should nationalize the banks, as I said earlier. I think we need to tax the rich and not raise taxes on other sectors of society. I think most regular people already don't have enough money, already pay too much in taxes, that we shouldn't increase them. And the reality is all the other parties are in practice pro-austerity parties that are calling for working people and students to pay for a crisis that they had no part in creating, and to let the banks who caused the crisis keep going on making record profits, just as they did before.
Mike Lensgrave, Young Americans for Liberty.
To reduce the deficit, we need to cut spending, plain and simple. The path our government is on now is completely unsustainable, and increasing taxes on the rich isn't going to work. France is currently taking that approach, and all the millionaires in that country are taking their money elsewhere. That's because money goes where it is welcome, and the more you tax someone's productivity, the less incentive that person has to be productive, so that person ends up taking his money to where it is welcome. The government taxes cigarettes to deter smoking, so wouldn't that mean taxing income would have the same effect on working? The goal here is to eliminate the waste that comes with government spending our money, not to give them more of our money to spend. Libertarians acknowledge that spending is not inherently good, but rather quite destructive. This is because the government cannot create anything by itself. It can only take from current and future generations and distribute the resources. But as I mentioned before, it is very bad at distributing these resources and misallocates them, which causes bubbles, because too much capital is being invested to prop up a certain sector of the economy. Because increasing taxes will not help and government spending is often quite destructive, we need to cut wasteful spending. That is the only rational solution. And an excellent way to do this is to end the Federal Reserve's debt-based currency, which is loaned at interest to our government. This creates unnecessary costs for our government because they have to end up paying interest on these loans. In 1984, the Grace Commission under President Reagan found that our nation's income tax went solely to paying off the interest on the debt we owe to the Federal Reserve. We could save hundreds of billions of dollars simply by having our government printing its own debt-free currency, which is not the ultimate solution in itself, but is the single best solution to shrinking our deficit.
Drew Christensen, Republican Party.
Well, as I said before, our government's too big and it spends too much. We need to drastically cut spending, and I know Quentin and the Democrats have mentioned, spending cuts, but I haven't heard any specific spending cuts from them, and I'm willing to offer spending cuts for you. I think we should cut the Department of Defense. You're not going to hear that from some Republicans where they say we shouldn't cut defense, and there are people like that, but we absolutely need to cut defense. We need to keep our country secure, but we don't need to spend as much money on defense as we do now. In fact, even the Defense Department wants to cut defense. There's projects that we're paying for in the Defense Department that the Defense Department has recommended Congress cut, but Congress doesn't want to cut those projects because politicians, Democrats and Republicans, are protective of those projects because they a lot of times benefit constituents in their districts. Another thing we need to cut is Medicare and Social Security. We need to reform those programs. We need to make them sustainable so that they can be around here for our children and our grandchildren, and frankly, so that they're around for us. If we don't do anything with Social Security and Medicare, we're not going to see a stinking dime of Social Security and Medicare. I plan right now to never ever see a penny from Social Security and Medicare, because on the path we're on, I'm never going to see any of that money that I'm paying into that system. And unless we do something to change it, it's not going to be sustainable, and we're not going to see any of that money, and it's going to keep driving our debt and placing that on the backs of our children.
We're going to have one more question on domestic policy, and then we'll take a 10-minute break after that last set of responses. So this last domestic policy question is as follows. What role should government play in healthcare? And we'll start with Brandon Madsen and the Socialist Alternative.
Well, I think the best approach to healthcare is we should immediately implement a single-payer Medicare for all system as a step towards a national health service. I think we should take the profit out of sickness. I think right now the current system where insurance companies as well as big pharmaceuticals and hospitals where the administrators are making CEO level pay are just driving up costs and are creating all the wrong incentives, where the incentive for the insurance companies in particular is to deny people care as much as possible, because if you deny them coverage, then you get to keep more of the money that's getting paid in. I think we need to stop that. I think, as I mentioned earlier, Obamacare was effectively a handout to the insurance companies to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. And I think we need to stop that, sorry, millions. No. And the I think medical bills should not be a reason for anyone to go bankrupt in the richest country in the world. But they're in fact the biggest reason that people go bankrupt. The US spends twice as much on healthcare as most of the other countries in the industrialized world, but doesn't get any better results out of it. As much as 60% of the costs are paperwork, administration, billing, etc. Every job in medical billing is a job that could potentially be providing care to people, making it easier to get into the clinic quicker, etc. And I think, finally, all the fear-mongering that goes on when you talk about a single-payer system, about bureaucracy and so forth, that the government was to control it, is really unfounded, especially in the case that you have now, where the insurance companies are the biggest bureaucracies you could imagine and are extremely impenetrable and hard to get anything you want out of them. So I think there's more benefit to be gained than to be lost in that situation.
Thank you. Quentin Watamakama from the Democratic Party.
So I think government needs to play a role in healthcare for 3 reasons. Americans spend more on healthcare than any other nation. It's estimated that nearly 18% of our GDP is eaten up by healthcare. Counter to popular belief, the United States healthcare system is not that good. The World Health Organization ranks us 38th behind countries like Costa Rica and Morocco. And let's just keep it frank. A healthier population is a better population. Healthier citizens is something that's better for the economy. So I think a lot of the healthcare changes to the healthcare industry that were introduced in the Affordable Care Act are steps in the right direction. The Affordable Care Act forces health insurance companies to spend more dollars on actual patient care instead of corporate profits or advertisements. The Affordable Care Act makes it available, makes insurance companies not deny people with pre-existing conditions, and it also allows parents to keep children on their health care to the age until they're 26, which is good because, as you know, a lot of us are starting out and we're not going to have health insurance. It's estimated that the Affordable Care Act will, right now we have 55 million uninsured Americans, and by 2017 that number will drop below 30 million. And I think the Medicare expansion is also a great tool for individual states to expand health insurance to the most vulnerable citizens. I think there's more that we can do. I support the concept of a public option like Senator Sanders has been pushing for many years. There's a current proposed law out there right now that would, if passed, it would, premiums would be 5 to 7% lower than the private market, and a public option run by the government could actually be save $104 billion from the deficit over the next 10 years.
Drew Christensen for the Republican Party.
I think the first step to solving healthcare in this country is repealing the Affordable Care Act. Some know it as Obamacare. Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, is crippling to businesses in this country. You've heard countless business owners, for example, the CEO of Whole Foods, but there's now a liberal boycott of Whole Foods because the CEO said that it's going to severely hurt his business and he's going to have to cut employees because of all the stuff that he's going to have to pay towards Obamacare. In addition, Denny's is going to, so, you know, your late night hangout spot after a long night, Denny's is going to start putting on their receipts an Obamacare fee to cover all the expenses that they're going to have from Obamacare, because they're going to have to provide that for all of their employees now. The problem is with, for example, Brandon's solution is, how do we motivate people to become doctors, and how do we motivate doctors to be good doctors if there's no motivation of profit in the incentive? People always talk about how much money doctors make, and I'm darn glad that my doctor makes a lot of money, because frankly, I don't want my garbage man doing brain surgery on me. I'm just saying. Yeah, people demonize the profits of doctors and of health professionals, but thank God for it, because I want the smartest, the best, and the brightest people of our society doing these complex medical procedures on us.
Michael Linsgrave, Young Americans for Liberty.
Our healthcare system needs less government involvement, not more. Like Quentin said, we used to have the #1 healthcare system in the world, but then the government created Medicare and Medicaid in 1965, and ever since, healthcare costs have risen dramatically, while the quality of services stagnated. And we're now ranked 38th in the world, and we do pay more per capita than any other nation. Even though healthcare costs have steadily risen since the 60s, unsubsidized services such as LASIK eye surgery and chiropractors have decreased the cost of their services while simultaneously increasing the quality. The Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, is only going to make our healthcare system worse. It's going to limit the treatment options for doctors and patients. It imposes several new taxes on American citizens and small businesses. It creates unnecessary paperwork burdens, which are very costly to hospitals and clinics, and it's going to make insurance premiums soar. A single-payer system is even worse because patients drastically overconsume healthcare services because they don't pay for them. This will inevitably lead to rationing, which leads to long waits for treatment, as is the case with Canada. In addition, costs will increase even more due to the incentivizing of this overuse. We need to redefine the meaning of health insurance. Insurance was created to be used for emergency purposes only, but today we use it to pay for everything healthcare related. Using insurance this way creates a massive moral hazard because the consumer or patient no longer cares how much a procedure, checkup, or doctor visit is going to cost them because they're not the ones paying for it. The insurance companies are, or in a single payer case, the government is. If the consumer had to pay for everyday healthcare expenses, he or she would shop around for the best price, and it would also force hospitals, clinics, and medical personnel to compete with one another to deliver the best service to the patient for the cheapest cost.
Thank you very much.